All right, let's make sure we've got this going. Good morning, everybody. Just getting off my workout here and trying to get settled or in the feed zone. Thanks for joining us. I've got some really interesting information per usual. Just trying to find all of our links here. I'm going to actually start off with my normal intro, and I've got a really cool video to show. So let's head into the topics here. Yeah, sure everything's streaming and going. Thanks for the group holding us together. Not a huge amount of people on the course, but thanks so much for those joining in. I do appreciate it. Looking good there. Stream looks good there. Everything rolling there. On the course, but awesome. Okay, that works. Okay, let's get to our first slide here. All right, welcome to In the Feed Zone. My name is Jason Flores. I go by JFlow. If you just missed it, I just got off workout, did my 20-minute FTP test, so definitely going to be putting my In the Feed Zone recovery tactics in and working after this quick presentation here, so we can get started. Quick medical disclaimer that the only purpose of this live stream is to educate and to inform. And it's no substitute for professional care by a doctor or any other qualified medical professional. And this live stream is provided by the understanding that it does not constitute any medical or professional advice or services. The goals of the live stream today are to present current articles in the media covering food and hydration and how it relates to endurance and sports, and to open a dialogue for viewers to ask questions and get advice. So today we'll be covering something pretty unique on the heels of the Tour de France ending. We're going to be covering a really interesting article by Sports in Science. If you're not familiar with the group, they're actually the group that or the company that fuels Team Sky. So we're going to talk a little bit about the fueling of the stages of the Grand Tour, and specifically what fueled Chris Froome to his yellow jersey this year. But to start off, what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick, really interesting video by the nutrition scientists at Team Sky to give us a little bit of a peek at what their days look like. So just give me a second to switch over the audio, and then we'll be able to present this video to everybody here in just a moment. Thanks for standing by. All right, I'll switch this guy over. One more switch. All right, here we go. We'll pipe.
For the 6-7 months building up to the tour, it's just making sure every little thing is heading towards trying to win the Tour de France. Your nutrition is a cornerstone to performance. You can train all you want, but if you're not fueling properly and getting the right kind of nutrients, you're going to crash and burn sooner or later.
So for a rider like Chris, who really believes in how nutrition can influence performance, we'll start thinking about that in December 2016. And the way that we do that is to try and use nutrition to drive training adaptations in a framework where it's meal by meal, but also day by day. We consistently consume high protein, but what we do is we periodise the carbohydrate for as and when we need that. And that means that we work very closely with the coach, we work very closely with Chris, we collect all of our feedback, we're constantly monitoring all of that data just to make sure that we're on track for what we need to achieve 6 months down the line.
This last couple of years we've really been able to get a good consistency of messages across the riders, and people are really into the products that we're using.
Well, Grand Tours represent our biggest challenge really. When you think about it, you've got 21 days of riding for 5 and 6 hours on your bike. There's 3 main nutritional challenges for us. The first one is making sure that we're fueled to perform each day, but also that we recover to perform on consecutive days. The second one is that we manage people's weights during the 3 weeks. We don't want to put on weight, but we certainly don't want to lose weight.
With James's input and his attention to detail and the way in which he uses science and sport products to sort of help us monitor and maintain weight has been really good.
And then last but not least is making sure that people don't get ill. And in the 2016 Tour de France we did a great job of that. That was the first time we had 9 riders actually get over the line, and that was a real big achievement for us. So one of the things that we try and do in a Grand Tour is we take each stage in isolation, because every stage is different, but then also all of those stages can add up to represent real hard times in the race, 2 or 3, sometimes 4-day blocks. And we try and work with the coaches to predict the energy requirements for those particular stages, and then of course we then fuel each stage differently. Every rider will go into the stage with their own specific fueling plan, and if you stick to the plan, then hopefully success will happen.
I really like having everything sort of planned before the event. I know when I'm going to eat certain things, and I know I've got enough with me to last the duration of the event.
So for mountain stages, we try and split it into 3 components of the race really. The first part of the race is mainly solids, so that could be rice cakes or it could be energy bars. And in the second third of the race, we then try and make the transition to semi-solids, which of course is gels. And then in the last third of the race, right before the climbs, we will then make the transition to caffeine gels. And we want people to hit that climb really in a fresh mindset, a strong mindset, and that's where we believe that we can use caffeine strategically.
When we're racing, it's pretty much all thinking about what's actually happening in the race, getting things right with fueling strategies and what's coming up.
So time trials represent a somewhat different nutritional challenge actually, because of course it's a shorter effort, but it's also a much more high intensity effort, which kind of means that it's fueled 100% by carbohydrate.
In training you want to do exactly what you're going to do in the race basically. You don't want to go into a race having not had a certain gel or drink.
So the first thing that we have to ensure is that the rider, when they turn up to race, is capable of utilising those carbohydrates as a fuel source, so that they start that time trial feeling light and that they can just generate those real high intensity efforts.
In the 24 hours before racing, you're already really dialing in on the whole nutritional side of things. You want to be well fueled but not bloated. You don't want to have too much sodium intake the day before. You don't want to go into the race retaining a lot of water.
So for flat stages in particular, the initial advice would be that maybe you don't have to fuel as much as you would have to do on a mountain stage. But we also try and get the riders into the mindset, you know, anything can happen in a bike race. It can be very unpredictable, so don't get caught out actually. So although we try and say to riders to manage your fuel intake on a flatter stage, we also make sure they have that mindset that in case the race goes off, they're ready to go as well. For us on a flat stage, because the intensity might not be as high, then our predominant fueling strategy would be more solids actually, so perhaps more rice cakes, more bars. We would make the transition to gels towards the end of the stage, and we would probably use less caffeine gels on a flat stage actually.
I've enjoyed working with SIS, certainly for what we need in terms of long endurance events. I think we're completely covered.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so back on here on Discord. Looks like everything is dialed in. You guys should be able to hear me there, yes?
Yep.
Sounds good, sounds good. We'll go ahead and move forward. But yeah, really interesting article, or actually really interesting video by SIS. Been using this product actually for about a year or so for my gel source. They offer an isotonic gel, which definitely check out. But yeah, there's a quick overview of kind of what they did, but we're actually going to dive a little bit more into it here in our slides. So let me make sure we are all lined up. And so far, so good. Yeah, all right. So we've got a couple slides here that we're going to touch. First would be fueling a stage of a Grand Tour. They touched a little bit on the demands of each event, general nutrition goals, as well as fueling for the different stages, the mountain, the flat, and the time trials. Pretty interesting in the fact that, hey, how could we use these in our everyday kind of workouts and rides, or even our Zwift rides, depending on the different courses or efforts and that sort of thing, trying to put things in perspective to allow us to nourish ourselves appropriately. Let me get my notes going up. So essentially, just a quick overview for Tour de France, kind of the numbers that we're looking at. We're looking at over 21 stages. Riders end up completing a distance of about 33,516, about 3,500 kilometers, and about 45,000 meters of climbing. So definitely a good amount. In total, there are 9 stages. Obviously, we want 9 flat stages. 5 hilly stages and 5 mountain stages, which we all really enjoyed over the past couple 3 weeks. 3 summit finishes. There's actually 1 in each week, and then rest days that occur after stage 9 and 15. So the key of this, or like if you've been listening to podcasts and that sort of thing, is essentially recovery, because the stages usually started around 11 or 12, and then they start up, they end around 5 or 6, so pretty difficult in that respect. So we're looking at each stage, or each of the race ending and beginning with the time trial, kind of going back to the demands of the event, and then wrapping up with rest days, like I said, at stage 9, after stage 9 and 15. So pretty huge event kind of overall, but kind of puts things in perspective of the different things that we've been watching. And so the general nutrition goals that they have, and with all stage races, the ability is to fuel and recover consistently, day to day to day, an amazing amount, and it can be produced by this main nutritional goal. So since the race ends around 5 or 6 p.m. by the time they get down, we are looking at the next stage starting the next day around 11 or 12, kind of get going. So we're looking at an 18-hour turnaround from recovery from one stage to the next, which is just amazing when we think about it. So it begins straight away after the stage, looking at recovery drinks with a blend of carbohydrate and protein, a lot of things that we've been talking about. They're looking at high carbohydrate fruit smoothies and that sort of things, just getting the carbohydrate stores back in. But it also starts from the beginning of the day, which we'll kind of go through here. So as far as carbohydrates, they're looking at 1 to 1.5 kilograms per hour during the first 2 or 3 hours right after the rides. And then we're looking at, as you move forward, their main evening meal. After that, they're looking at a pretty huge amount, looking at 3 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate. So really putting in that post-carbohydrate source in to making sure that they have fuels kind of topped up for the evening. And of course rest into the evening, and then breakfast containing, again, 2 to 3 grams depending on what their demands of that day, a flat stage, a mountain stage, or a time trial. They do things like porridge, fruit smoothies, pasta, rice, breads. Really depends on rider to rider on what they're feeling will make their body the best. So looking at that, so they want to make sure that their glycogen stores are essentially ready for the next 3 or 4 hours into the saddle. So looking at the different stages, they actually tune their both breakfast and their dinners to exactly what they need. So talking a little bit about mountain stages, the finishes are completed at intensities well above lactate threshold. For them, it's like 350, 400 watts threshold powers. And they are needing to ensure that they have high carbohydrate availability for those winning moves that are essentially, those breakaways, those, putting people on the rivet as they go up the mountain stages. And so ensuring carbohydrate intake for the breakfast and the night before are huge. They're looking at the 2 to 3 grams again per kilogram of body mass, as well as on the bike, they're looking at 75 to 90 grams per hour, which is it's a pretty huge amount. Anywhere from 60 to 90 is almost the maximum a body can consume. Obviously, we've talked about mixed ways of getting this in, whether it be through drinks and or through solid sources. So really solid in that respect. So needing to mix that in so that you can absorb it. And then, of course, immediately after the race, we talked about 1.5 kilograms grams per kilogram, super critical for promoting fueling and recovery for the next day. So a lot of these stages are usually, as we saw this year, we're under extreme heat. So along with carbohydrate fluid, electrolytes are also very important. So they're making sure that they're getting their hydration and their fueling all together. Okay, and then if you remember, they talked a little bit about mixing solid foods, rice cakes and things like that with gels. As the race goes on, 2 hours and further, a lot of times you'll find that the body, it's difficult to get down more solid food. So more kind of gelled or kind of softer foods can definitely be digested a lot easier, making the transition during the second half of this race is what you'll a lot of times see. And then towards the very end, what they'll find is caffeine gels are usually used towards the end, about 30 to 45 minutes before the toughest section or the end for that mental boost or that last bit of kind of tuning down of perceived exertion, essentially. So a little bit about fueling their flat stages, the main thing about these is maintaining their optimal power to weight. So what they typically do, which sounds crazy, is they actually try to manage weight by deliberately fueling less, because there's this huge middle section of the gruppetto or the peloton chasing, that sort of thing, where there's a lot of hours just at a high tempo or at a tempo pace for them. For us, it would be neck breaking, but for them, it's more at a tempo pace. So they're usually achieved where they're actually a little bit less. They drop down to about 30 or 60 grams, about half of what they would normally put in during those heavy mountain stages, to decrease the amount of carbohydrates. But the recovery also wasn't seen to be as aggressive in terms of carbohydrate because of the efforts that were put out. So those mountain stages are definitely in contrast to the flat stages here. And so again, the 30 or 40 grams within 30 minutes of the stage completion, they do that every single time. And again, since they're normally undertaken below threshold, it's these instances where essentially fat becomes an important fuel. And we've talked about that, the ability of your aerobic fitness to be able to use fat as a fuel before jumping into that carbohydrate or that glycogen store in order to get those energy stores or that energy out. But still, they must be able to adapt, because there are some days that are super, super hard and super fast where efforts will be above tempo or just a really high pace. So they're going to need to be able to change their in-race strategy and get the food they need if the intensity is starting to creep up and that sort of thing. And so the last part, kind of unique thing, is fueling time trials. So this is unique in the fact that the intensity is so, so high. We saw both a short and kind of a medium length time trial, and both intensities are very, very high at threshold or above. So they are prominently fueled by carbohydrate metabolism. And so the evening meal the night before, prior to the time trial, becomes very, very important. So this point is the last major point to increase their glycogen stores, as riders aim for to intake at least on the high end, the 3 grams of kilogram of body mass in this meal. So the night before is super key for any of this. And so this falls into a lot of our really long, really shorter, harder rides, if you're targeting them here in the modules and things like that. But even if you're into crit racing or short circuit racing, the night before is key. Pre-race meal is usually a little bit lighter, lower in fiber to help digestion and absorption, and is consumed about 2.5 to 3 hours before the event. For them. So riders will also consume carbohydrate right in the warm-up in a very kind of gel type form, and usually 2 to 3 milligrams per kilogram of caffeine. Short events definitely can use caffeine, looking in at an hour or less. So crits and circuits in that shorter time frame, anything less than 2 hours, you're looking at being able to use something like that. So in order to prepare, riders will also have previously loaded with beta-alanine hours before, as well as or consume biocarbonate, which we've talked about both here on the podcast. So you can go back and check those episodes out around 90 minutes before going down the ramp and starting their time trial. So definitely very interesting with the different stages, how they fuel their efforts. Obviously, with mountain stages being kind of on the higher end, flat stages kind of being on the higher tempo end, and then time trials being on the full rivet and kind of all out carbohydrate sources. So let's see, for that part of it, I've got a couple questions. I can address those, or just kind of interesting. Taya asked, I wonder how they personalize the nutrition for each rider, whether calories spent or more scientific than that. So Taya, from what I listened to or kind of watched as I went through the slides, what I found was that each of the riders through training, they actually have a log of what they like and don't like. So each of their bags are pretty personalized of what each rider will like. So I think that the calorie-wise, I don't think they're counting. I think they probably are taking on more in their feed bags than they need, but each of them have the things that they like. So maybe somebody likes all gels, maybe somebody likes all more solid foods. So there'll be a mix of those in each of their bags, and they'll distribute them accordingly for both training and for race days, at least from what I saw. So definitely very interesting, but training leading up to, I think, is more important. Making sure that they're able to take in the things that they are going to have in the race, as well as having those things available. Whether they eat all of them in their feed bag is another story, or if they end up taking on food from other people, could be of interest of other riders, that is. There's a lot of trading going on as well, from what I understand. So let's see. Yeah, and Kev Kev makes a comment that I imagine that each of their specific needs would have to be met, and yeah, the chefs definitely are part of that to make sure that the riders are getting what they need. So on to our second part here. We've got about 10 minutes left. What fueled specifically Chris Froome to his yellow jersey this year? So we're going to cover a couple things here, which are fueling during the race, his pre-race kind of regimen during the stage, and his hydration pre-race, during race, and post-race. So for him, before the race, is the breakfast, he actually didn't have anything different than what he normally would have during his normal just wake-up day of training. So like porridge, eggs, yogurt, smoothies, all those things, just in larger quantities than he would normally have during his training sessions during the year. So it's essentially consistent throughout the race days. One thing that I found with the videos that I watched of Chris Froome was that he likes consistency. He likes to know what he's going to have every single meal. Kind of, it's there, prepared. There's no thought, and that goes for a lot of kind of real high level, whether it be business people, entrepreneurs, just kind of removing that first thought of like, what are you going to wear today? What are you going to do today? Just removing that first kind of sticking point to make things easier for the rest of the day. It's again, consistent throughout the race days to help promote, protein intake, lean muscle mass, and calorie expenditure could be as high as 5,000 to 8,000 kilocalories per day. So it's a huge amount to make sure that he's got that in. Really got to make sure that it's all available. So during the stage, it was typically always planned and followed strictly by each of the riders, and again, well practiced in the training camps and early in the season, such as racing at the Criterion de Daphne and other things like that. So aiming for pieces of high energy per hour, which is in a combination between electrolyte drinks and gels and rice cakes. Again, kind of the go-tos that we see. A couple feed zones back, we looked at videos of what comes in people's feed zone bags, and you'll notice it's usually a mix of not just one thing or another, where before, with the advent of gels, everyone was just slamming gels every 30 to 45 minutes. So usually, again, more solid food in less intense sections of the race. And then one of his favorites I found, or they mentioned, was an apple flavored rice cake, which is definitely super cool to hear. As the pace stepped up, he usually switches to gels, and then they're saved when energy is needed, super quick, super fast, that fast hit. And then also caffeine towards the end. So again, the normal SIS kind of, presentation, very thought out, methodical, and the amount is really up to the rider, but they know what they're doing because of the fact that they've done it before, and they're looking at how they've done it and just kind of following that method. Hydration, especially in the heat, pre-hydration is really important. And again, we've covered this in the feed zone, kind of tying pre-hydration beforehand and getting those salts and electrolytes in. And so a lot of riders will use, a high level of electrolytes before the race, the night before, to help absorb and retain fluid that's used effectively during each stage. And with that, juices, shakes, and all those other things, they're looking at about 10 milliliters per kilo in the 2 or 3 hours before a stage. So they're putting a good amount of water on beforehand to make sure that they're pre-hydrated before each race, and those electrolytes are filled and topped off as they enter the stage. So during the stage, it's taken on, for him, it's actually dialed in for his exact sweat rate. So we've talked a little bit about that before, and if you've caught the talk that Alan Lim gave this week, he talks about sweat rate testing. Obviously, kind of on that marginal gains level of things, but essentially his sweat rate and the amount of sodium that he loses per hour is replaced and worked out before. And so he would aim for a certain amount of milliliters of fluid per hour. And what that allowed him to do is make sure that it was on par, so that he wouldn't just consume water. It would be an opportunity to kind of mix electrolytes and carbohydrates as he went along. And so each of the bottles would be labeled differently. If you notice, look closely, I actually went back. There's actually blue tip bottles and black on black bottles. So there's actually, each of the bottles will tell them exactly what is inside, which is really interesting. Other teams, they'd write on the top of the different stuff. So again, just kind of interesting in that respect. Let's see. So post-race, so all the riders, they actually recover very seriously, often with less than 24 hours, like we said, 18 hours from stage to stage on average. As soon as he finished the stage, they're looking at recovery shakes. They're looking at, protein synthesis, making sure that the muscles are being rebuilt, and then replacing those carbohydrate stores straight away. So on the bus, on the back to the hotel, they're, again, right away rehydrating, electrolytes, it all starts over again, and the cycle kind of continues essentially from day to day. So aiming to take about 150% of the fluid lost during the stage. They're really pushing the hydration because of the stage races. And in addition to all the riders, they consume a meal containing, of course, the carbohydrates up to 3 grams per kilogram, protein, vegetables, and that sort of thing post-race. And then as they get back to the hotel for their evening meal, the chef includes all variety of foods, salads, rice, pastas, just a huge variety because, in that respect, it's a chance for them to get those other foods in with still time to digest, where you couldn't do it like right before race or really quick time trial or something like that. And then before going to sleep, which is one thing that I've read about as well, is that a lot of them would be taking a slow releasing protein. And if you remember our talk from in the feed zone as well, they're talking about a combination of whey protein and casein protein being the slower releasing protein to feed his muscles throughout the evening into the night to get ready for the next race day, making sure that all of that muscle mass is kept on and the body doesn't slip into using that as a fuel. So again, using timing and the different types of fuels to kind of dial everything in is used here, and something we can bring into our everyday kind of feed zone or everyday feeding, just to make sure that we're getting the things that we need to be able to fuel our workouts every day. Obviously not to the level of 18-hour turnover days or making it that we need to ride at their level every day, but just understand that every day that we do train, on those days that we train, that we want to make sure that we're fueling for those days, we're properly hydrating for the harder days, and then on an off day that we're actually, for people who don't train every day, that we're actually turning it down or turning it off, to making sure that we're not overfeeding ourselves on the days that we don't train. So just kind of a cool look at the feed zone side of what Team Sky did, or very similar to what a lot of the other teams did, as I kind of went through the gamut of what the different teams did as far as fueling. Very, very similar. Obviously, Team Sky is very, very well publicized on the different things they do as far as fueling. But I think just a fun look at what they do. So yeah, so just a quick summary. Let me see if I can go back just one slide. Yeah, so the different fueling stages of the Grand Tour, we talked about the demands of the event, nutritional goals, kind of overall nutritional goals, fueling for different types of stages, the mountain, the flat, and the time trials. And then specifically applying that to one of the riders, Chris Froome, specifically his pre-race and during stage fueling and hydration. You notice that they separate those two things in the fact that they're making sure that they're getting both kind of dialed in and up. We're not getting all things from one place just because the events are so long. And with the ability to be able to fuel on the bike, we have that opportunity. So excellent. So all right, so I will post, again, per usual, I will post the direct links to these articles here in the talk. I'll see if there's any other comments here. We have a couple viewers here. No comments there, but definitely really interesting for In the Feed Zone. We do have a couple things in store for us. We're going to try to get a couple more live interviews like we had with Cameron Hoffman. We have our review of Endurance 360. I just finished my first 4-week cycle period with it. Just a little teaser. Obviously, if you tuned in the last hour or so, just finished my FTP test. I'm pretty happy with the results. Efforts are pretty high, it's pretty painful, so go back and watch that video. I'm gonna have to watch the last 10 minutes of that. It's kind of all of a blur. But thanks for joining here in the Feed Zone. If you have any questions, definitely post up. Again, I'll post the articles here, and I will see everyone next week in the Feed Zone.